Photoshop Project 4. This is stage 5, starting on page 261. It is working in 3D. We did a little bit of simulating 3D with Illustrator when we did the extrudes. Photoshop works very well with 3D. You can create items from scratch. You can import wireframes and rendered artwork from 3D applications like Maya or 3D Studio Max. This is an intro to 3D functionality. We do have some terms that are standard that we use across 3D. Meshes or wireframes are the skeletons of the 3D object. It's the underlying shape. The materials are the surface that are applied to that shape, the covering over the wireframe. Lighting is the highlights and the shadows that are created. And camera position is the point of view that the person has looking at the object. And you should read through that on page 261 so you get a good understanding of 3D. Before we duplicate and create our 3D layer, let's go into Preferences and check the performance to make sure that you are using your graphics processor, and say OK to that. If you had gotten a VRAM warning the first time you launched Photoshop, you may not be able to complete this section, and you may just be finished right here. And I don't think any of you had that problem, but if you did, just make a note of it when you turn in your project. We are going to duplicate the Rochambeau layer by selecting it and dragging it to the New Layer panel. That's a shortcut. We can then hide the original, and you're going to rename the copy so that it is Rochambeau 3D. If your guides are still visible, you need to go up and hide your guides. Then choose 3D, New Mesh from Layer, and select Postcard. This is going to open up your 3D panel as well as opening up the secondary view. You may get a message launched that asks you if you would like to automatically switch to the 3D workspace. If so, say yes, and your Properties panel will reflect the 3D workspace. Take a look at the 3D layer in your Layers panel, and you'll see that it has now got this little icon in the corner indicating that it is now a 3D layer. The selected layer content is also converted to a material. This is your secondary view panel, and you should go into the menu here and select the default view, and you'll see the proxy for the 3D layer. The panel is a good way to look at other aspects of a 3D option without affecting what appears on the canvas. So you can rotate to different views, which the only thing that's really going to show anything for us is the default or front view. In the Tools panel, make sure that you have your Move tool selected, and if you'd like, you can close the secondary view panel. You don't need that. In the Options bar, choose the Orbit the 3D Camera mode, and you can read the explanations for the other settings on page 264. In your 3D panel, select Current View, and in the document window, click the 3D ground plane, that's this, the grid on the bottom, and drag to reposition the ground plane. And you can see how that affects that 3D layer. In your Properties panel, make sure you've got the 3D camera selected, And you can then choose default in the view menu. And that will reset the camera view. In the 3D panel, click the Rochambeau 3D mesh, and that's going to bring up the widget. You have the x-axis, the y-axis, and your z-axis, which is pointing right straight at you. It's the blue one. And each one of the widgets has a different section to it. So the top or the point on there is the move along, and with that you can click and drag and move. The second part is the rotate. You click on that, you'll do tilts. The move along the axis, so okay, this is going to push it and pull it because we're moving along the z-axis. So that's a change. Remember, my z-axis is coming towards me. X-axis. My y-axis, rotate. And again, my z-axis. Now if I rotate this a little bit, I can actually pick up, should be able to pick up there. Now you can start to see the blue. And if I click on the widget and just drag up, that's going to enlarge everything. Move on my z-axis. There. So we can kind of demonstrate how everything's moving around. Rotate around your y-axis control on the red axis, and we want to drag that a little bit to rotate forward. Now we can pick up the z-axis. We can also enlarge our widget if we hold down the shift key and drag up. Come on. There, trying to get my widget a little bit larger. Well, I think that's about as large as I'm going to get that to move. So in the z-axis, then you can click to rotate the z. I'll keep losing it. There it is. Rotate the z-axis at the x-axis and drag up to rotate that. And then pick up the x-axis, which is the red widget, and move that and drag it to move the mesh until the right edge of the image is just past the canvas edge. You can mess with this and make this as many changes to this really as you'd like. We can pull and enlarge this. Scale along the z-axis, scale along the x-axis, the y-axis. Remember, scaling on the z-axis. So when you're happy with what your results are, there we go, move it and move that along. I can bring that up a little larger. I can reposition, dragging. Let me move this up and scale it a little bit more. I'm a little bit happier with that. And then in the bottom of the Properties panel, there is a Render button. You can click that, and that's going to render the 3D object. And when that's done rendering, you can save your file. This rendering process can take quite a long time. It just depends on your computer. You'll have a status that's going to be output. I should have brought my timeline up because I can't get to my render progress. So walk away and take a break. And when you come back, go back to your layers panel, deselect, and you'll go back to normal. Make sure that file is saved, and we're going to move back to the festival file. And on here we are going to create a 3D sphere. So we are making a new layer at the top of the stack and name this globe. And in your 3D panel, choose selected layers for your source and choose the Mesh from Preset option. And from the drop-down, choose Sphere, and then Create at the bottom of the panel. If you get an embedded profile thing, choose to convert the document's colors in the working space. If you get the secondary view panel, you can close that. We don't need that. And in the 3D panel, again, you're going to select the sphere material. In the Properties panel, open the menu next to the Base Color option and choose Replace Texture. In the dialog box, you're going to pick up the Field JPEG from your WIP folder and select Open. If you see another warning about the mismatched color thing, just go ahead and use the embedded profile. Click on the sphere itself to select the mesh objects. You're going to get a gray line around the edges that represents the mesh edge, and drag to move the object into that bottom right corner. You're going to have to just drag to move it and get it placed. So kind of covering the poppy that we had in the other layer. In the Properties panel, click the Coordinates button. That's going to show the numeric position on the mesh object. Move the cursor near the vertical edge of the mesh cage. When the cursor feedback shows rotate around x-axis, so let's go to rotate, there's x-axis. Click and drag right until the large cluster of poppies is visible on the sphere. And then you can rotate on the y-axis So you're just going to rotate the ball until you get the position that you're happiest with. And you can use either the edge of the cube that's holding the sphere, or you can use the widget. Click the Scale Uniformly control and drag up to enlarge the sphere. That's this thing, Scale Uniformly, and you drag up and you're going to make the sphere bigger. In the Properties panel, again, show the coordinates if they're gone, and click the Move to Ground button. This snaps it to create the appearance of sitting on the ground plane, and that's represented by that red line. In the 3D panel, you're going to need to select the current view. Choose Pan the 3D camera button in the options bar, and then you can click and drag until the sphere is back in the same relative position that it was before you snapped it to the ground plane.